Hey everyone, in my last video I defined SIFO, small intestine fungal overgrowth, and I discussed the symptoms that have been associated with this condition in the medical literature. I now want to discuss the risk factors of SIFO. Now, for a long time we have known that those with compromised immunity are at risk of fungal infections and perhaps SIFO. That's going to be individuals with perhaps a diagnosis of cancer, those who perhaps are going through chemotherapy. It could be someone who's on immunosuppressant drugs and steroids, but also someone who has type 2 diabetes, perhaps where it's not very well managed. We could also add antibiotics and proton pump inhibitors to this list of risk factors. Proton pump inhibitors are medications that can lower our stomach acid. But as I very briefly discussed in the previous video, we also now have evidence showing us that healthy individuals can develop SIFO as well. Now, I want to touch on two of those risk factors that we've just mentioned, including antibiotics and proton pump inhibitors, because some evidence suggests that low stomach acid might be a risk factor. And certainly an issue in the motility of the small intestine is also a risk factor. Motility is really just referring to the rate at which food and things ultimately are traveling through the small intestine. Now, we discussed in the first video that a more systemic symptom perhaps of a fungal issue is a white coating on the tongue. And we touched on the fact that we know very well that in SIBO, there's almost a subtype whereby bacteria that have overgrown in the mouth are being swallowed in our saliva, are passing through the stomach and ending up in the small intestine, creating SIBO. And this mechanism may be true for SIFO as well. So we have to be thinking about stomach acidity as a potential risk factor. Now, Candida albicans is the main type of Candida that has been found in those with SIFO. And Candida albicans is often referred to as a kind of an opportunistic organism. So this is where a course of antibiotics may be a risk factor. You take that course of antibiotics, you are having a sort of quite a broad impact on that microbiome, and it's an opportunity ultimately for Candida to take up more space ultimately, and therefore its community, the quantity of Candida present in the small intestine, has an opportunity to increase as well. So those are some of the main risk factors ultimately. I guess the question becomes, well, if stomach acid and motility are sort of key defense mechanisms from SIFO and SIBO occurring, well, what impacts them? And one thing that ties or connects both of these things is thyroid health. Thyroid hormones have a role to play within appropriate production of stomach acid, but also in motility within the small intestine. So sometimes it's important to rule out thyroid dysfunction as an underlying cause of SIBO or SIFO. Stress has to be mentioned here as well. Stress can absolutely have an impact on the microbiome. It might provide an opportunity for Candida to proliferate. It can impact on motility and it can lower stomach acid. So even a period of chronic psycho-emotional stress could potentially be a risk factor for someone as well. So those are really the known risk factors associated with SIFO. In the next video, I'm going to talk about testing options when it comes to SIFO and how sometimes repeat SIBO testing can shed further light on whether actually SIFO might be a component of what's contributing to our ongoing digestive issues.